on your head for the rest of the night. We'll stop now. Okay, so I'm here, hopefully, to give you some information about a name that will be very familiar to you, but probably most of the information about him isn't. And it will be a name that sprung into your head when you saw that word. There he is. Isn't he gorgeous? That is probably the only contemporary image of him, but people have used that for inspiration, much like our Bavardist. That big clue for all the Greek speakers, ancient Greek speakers of Greece. Some lovely images, all with lovely beards. Very important if you're a philosopher to have a beard. Have you worked it out yet? Excellent. So, Pythagoras, synonymous with maths and misery, really, which are pretty much the same thing. If you're UK educated, creating frustrated schoolchildren for centuries, I am going to very, very quickly run through the maths really fast in case I scare anyone and you leave, right? But only to stop you spending the next 15 minutes trying to remember what the bloody hell it was. So, he said that the sum of the square on the two short sides is equal to the area of a square on the hypotenuse. You can say this all together, like a squared plus b squared equals c squared. See, you remember. You haven't got any idea what it's for, but you remember. It doesn't just work with squares, but they're easier to calculate. It actually works with anything, as long as you use the same shape on each side, including when I was Googling Mona Lisa. Because obviously the sum of the Mona Lisas on the two short sides is the same as the Mona Lisa on the long side. Really, really helpful. We call it Pythagoras' theorem, but it wasn't actually his. He sort of formalised it, wrote it down, but he stole it from the Babylonians, and a lot of other people knew about it. A lot of Eastern cultures were using it. I know you think there isn't a use for it, but there are reasons. So, no more maths. Enough maths. You can relax now. Okay? Really, Pythagoras was a philosopher, and he was, we think, the first person to use the word philosopher to describe himself, and that's what ancient Greeks who were interested in learning, philosopher, love of learning, knowledge, that's what they would have called him. So he was born on the Greek island of Samos, virtually in Turkey, in 570 BC, roughly, and he's sort of the first Greek name in philosophy that we're really familiar with. All those other ones that you can vaguely hear heard of, they were all later. He's almost as far back as mythology, just after the Spartans, pretty much predating everybody. So he was the son probably of a merchant. He travelled quite a lot, including to Babylon, which is where he picked up the theorem and dragged it home again, and then moved to Italy, which is where he actually settled in about 530 BC. And what philosophers are really trying to do is work out the best way to live, and once they think they've found it, they want to pass it on and educate people. So he did what a lot of Greek philosophers did and started a school, what we would really think of as a cult, in that he decided these were the rules, this is how you live, this is how you're happy, and made sure that everyone else did what he said. That was the important thing. So we'll run through a few things. This is going to look like a long list, but I promise I'll say it fast. So, to start with, men and women were equal, which was quite forward-thinking of him. I think it's only taken us 2,000 years to catch up. His wife and daughters, he had 4 children that we know of, a son and 3 daughters. They were probably all philosophers and part of his school. He advocated daily exercise, serenity and self-possession. Some things pretty much what we're still trying to achieve now. And temperance, not quite so high on everyone's list. Vaguely sort of Spartan lifestyle, stripped back. You don't need elaborate and expensive things to be happy. Novices served a 3-year apprenticeship in total silence. Something I think all teenagers should be made to do. And they identified each other sort of in code, so he actually got drummed out of doing this in Greece. Wasn't very kindly looked upon by the authorities because he contradicted them in some ways, said that he knew better. So they possibly moved to Italy to avoid some issues, and identified themselves by the way that they dressed, although I couldn't find out exactly what they meant, but it might have been a piece of jewellery, so that, because it wasn't just the people that directly lived with him, but it started to become something that spread in other areas, set up their own Pythagorean schools. So they had to declare devotion to each other above all else, really. And so these kind of things, Freemasonry does owe a debt to it, and I believe says that it does. They're quite happy to admit that they came from these kind of ideas. All of his disciples divided themselves into 2 groups, and they were called the Mathematikoi, Greek for teacher. So actually mathematics comes from teaching rather than anything scientific. And they were entirely the department that dealt with investigating, researching the scientific work. There was also the... I can't say that. Acous, as in acoustics. So that was Tim, what listener, acous, listener. That's right. So they were more about spreading the word and making sure that everyone lived in the right way. So we had kind of 2 departments of people working for him, and everything that they did kind of came under his name. They were disciples, really. So almost everything attributed to him probably came from their work. So a bit more detail. A slightly lopsided detail. So they had something to say, as all religions do, about food. They were almost certainly vegetarian. They were probably vegan. So none of that. No chickens. I like my chicken. I like my chicken. One of their core beliefs was the transmigration of souls, or maybe reincarnation is sort of how we would think of it. So they believed exactly that. They came back over and over again. Pythagoras claimed he could remember 4 of his previous lives in detail. A soldier in the Trojan War, a tradesman, and a courtesan. Probably best not to ask him what he remembers about that. He also became legendary for stopping someone from beating a dog in the street, because he, and I quote, can you quote after 2,000 years, said he could hear in its cries the voice of his departed friend. So apparently this dog was the reincarnation of a friend of his. What he'd done to be reincarnated as a dog, we don't really know. But anyway, on the basis that you or your friends might come back as a chicken, don't go around eating them. I think that seems like a logical step. They also didn't eat beans. So they would have been lost a couple of years ago. What would they have done? And there are good reasons for this and bad reasons. It is not that they thought they were going to be reincarnated as a tin of pints. And we're not entirely sure. There are lots of possible reasons. One of them, which is slightly discounted but quite fun, is that a little bit of your soul leaves your body when you break wind. So try and avoid things that a more realistic one was that because they didn't have our understanding of what different things were made of, and beans are quite fleshy, they thought that perhaps they were made of the same stuff and kind of linked up in that you shouldn't eat things that were flesh. They also thought that a lot of them looked like parts of the body, kidneys and things like that. And there was another possibility, which is that some beans grow on hollow stems. So if you've planted them in the ground where someone's been buried, their soul will have risen up through the stem and made its way into the bean, so you shouldn't eat it. What we do know is true is that there is a genetic defect called favism, for exactly that reason. It's an allergy to fava beans, and it can kill you. And it mostly affects Mediterranean heritage people. So there is every chance that he recognised around him that people were being negatively affected by eating beans and decided, we're not going to do that, that's bad, and enshrined it in his philosophy. No beans either. Okay, where he did really come into his own was astronomy. He's the first recorded person to say that the world was round, that he thought the Earth was a sphere. Obviously very difficult to tell 2,000 years ago, but the first person that we have a record of as saying that. And also predated Copernicus, that the sun was at the centre of our solar system and everything, or the universe, as far as they knew, that everything revolved around it, which is one of my pet stories about Pythagoras. So they believed, and it followed on from other people before him, that you couldn't just have things hanging in the air. That's ridiculous. So there must be something keeping them up there, and that every object that they could see in the sky was part of some kind of crystal sphere. They called it quintessence, some kind of matter that was holding it in place, that must be able to move because they could see the trajectory across the sky. But they also then, Pythagoras extended that, because he said, okay, so they're all up there moving around, rubbing against each other. They can't be doing that silently. There must be something going on. They must be making some kind of noise. Why can't we hear it? So he decided that possibly we couldn't hear it because we've always heard it. In the same way that you tune out anything after a while. We were born, we were conceived hearing that sound. We've always heard it, so we're not aware of it. So to reach transcendence as a Pythagorean, to actually tune into the universe to such a degree that you can hear the spheres twisting against each other and making beautiful music, which I think is beautiful. And has inspired a lot of people since, and the music of the spheres is a thing that's kind of gone on to be used as an inspiration for a lot of art and music and all those kind of things. Music was, weirdly, because he sort of seems like someone who doesn't have a lot of fun, music was something that was really important to them, that they thought we should spend time indulging in. And we do, as modern people, in fact, owe him a huge debt, because he did work out something that's very important to our music now. So I'm going to tell you the mythical version, and then I'm going to tell you what actually happened. So the mythical version is that he was walking through the marketplace, and he heard two blacksmiths working. And the way that those tones went together was very pleasing, and he wanted to know what was going on, why those two things sounded different but nice together. And when he asked the blacksmiths, they said one person was using a hammer half the size of the other, and that changed the tone of it. And that's actually nonsense. If you take two hammers, one size, half the size of the other, you don't get that at all. But if you take two strings, one half the size of the other, you do. You get an octave difference. And when we play the piano, as Dan will demonstrate later, assuming that the strings are the same weight and tension, it is the length of them. And those are fractional relationships. I said I wouldn't do any more maths. Sorry. There are fractions involved in the ones that sound good together are fractions of each other, and he worked that out. And so that's still the principle that Western music is based on now, this idea of fractional relationship between lengths of strings. So, influences in lots of different areas, and then I had a gap. And I thought, well, we've done food, and we've done music, so obviously... and of course he had something to say about that as well. And you're not going to like it. What he said was that copulation is not allowed in the summer. So you think it's great that it's all getting a bit warmer and spring-like outside, right? But it's not good at all. What we want is the winter. Okay? So if you take anything away from tonight is that you can't have sex for the next 6 months. I'm sorry. So yeah, I hope that's a little bit about somebody whose name you knew and whose life you knew nothing about. And just to show you a few demonstrations for anyone who missed it at school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw it over to questions, but I just have one question that I just wanted to ask you before taking some questions. How is the passion, where does the passion come from for you, for Pythagoras and why?
So I used to be one of those teenage torturers. I used to teach maths in a secondary school, and I figured, once I found out that there was so much more to him than just triangles, I couldn't work out why we teach kids about triangles and not about anything else. So I started to look into what else people weren't telling me.
Excellent. Right. Okay. So more Kilroy Stocks / Jeremy cards. Anybody have any questions for Jenna? Anybody want to know anything about Pythagoras or the? Yes. Okay. So I'm coming, running over. Yeah. I think it's not really what it's sort of working.
How comes we can't have sex in this?
I knew that. I would have put it in the talk. I really don't know. I'm sure there's a logic to it. But
don't you have a sort of speculative answer?
Is it hypotenuse related?
Yeah, that must be it. You'll end up with a triangular baby.
Love it. Excellent. Right. Any other questions? Sex or non-sex related? Yes, over here.
Sort of.
Hello. You told us a bit about what Pythagoras didn't eat, but I think we need to know a bit more about what you think he might have had for dinner.
Stop asking me questions I don't know the answers to. What did you eat in Greece 2,500 years ago that wasn't beans and wasn't chicken? Yes, lots of olives, I would imagine. I'm afraid no idea.
Dairy cheeses, I think, is clearly where he was probably going to go. Yeah. Any other questions? Pythagorean. Oh, yeah.
Just pass it
on. How much do you think he was actually a mathematician, bearing in mind you said he robbed the theorem from the Babylonians? And how much was he a cultist, actually, that is famous for running a cult rather than actually being a mathematician?
I think natural philosophy is what they would have thought of as science back then. So they kind of, until recently, they're things that were very closely linked together. And I'm not sure that he really was responsible for that much, personally. He became this kind of deified figure. His disciples really thought that he was partially a god. It was Greek times, and most of what we have about him was written a long time after he died. Maybe 400 or 500 years after he died, people like Aristotle started to write. By that time, everything obviously had been embellished, let's say. They believed that he had, I did say this once before, that he had a golden thigh. I found a piece that said he had, and that was sort of the only sentence. I don't know what that means. He personally had a thigh made of gold, or he kept it in a cupboard. I don't know what that was. I think he's probably, sort of in the same way as artists' studios, he probably had a lot of people working under his name, trying to work out how the world worked. Astronomy was really their big thing, I think, because they didn't have any answers. So, not so much mathematical, more scientific, but science from a point of view of how to live a good life.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
What did he, or how did he speculate that the world was round? Was there evidence?
I don't know. Sorry. No, I'm not sure. I know that he travelled a lot, and he travelled to the Middle East, where he would have met people presumably from the Far East, because I think the whole Pythagorean theorem came really from the Indians. So he would have known more so than a lot of his contemporaries that you can travel a long, long way, and presumably would have gone across the sea, so would have seen the horizon and those kind of things. What made him think you could go all the way round, I don't know. But yeah, he was certainly better travelled than a lot of his peers. So I guess that was part of it. Why he thought the sun was at the centre of the universe, when nobody else really was sure at the time, I don't know.
Any other questions? Anna, before we take another break. Yeah, down the front, yeah.
Do you know what his take was on religion? Because he sounds like a rationalist in general, apart from the cult thing. But did he believe in traditional ancient Greek gods? Or?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think a lot of those Greek philosophies were more about living a good life now than worshipping. And I think it's pretty much the same thing. Less interested in where he went afterwards. There was actually, which someone reminded me of earlier, about when he died, which I forgot to put in, which was the beans thing. So he was so frightened of beans, so determined to believe that they were bad, that one of the stories about how he died was that he was chased by some soldiers, because he didn't have a habit of pissing off the authorities, and that they chased him to the edge of a bean field, and he was so insistent that he wasn't going to cross it that he stopped at the edge of it, and they caught him and killed him. So, death by sword rather than death by beans. It's possible. But where he thought, I mean, they did believe, I guess, in the incarnation, so yeah, I'm not sure where that fits into Greek philosophy.
Yeah, well, nor me. But are there any final questions? I love that last story about death by beans. If there's no final questions, then can we thank Jenna for